white man?
Well, back in 1993, I did a tape called Human Artificial. And I did it in a lecture format, so I pretty much stuck to the main course of trying to explain the origin of the European based on the historical documents. I put out this particular pamphlet a year later in 1994 called the Human Artificials, and it went around the country, and also it's called Comedic and Ancient Documents of the Living Devil. And it was a real popular piece. I mean, people Xeroxed it till the graphics broke up. But what I was trying to do, this book was a consortium of different fragments from ancient and modern people dealing with the research of this European being created. Are made, in so many words, based on genetic engineering. And so, since 1994, I've gotten tons and tons of other research, so much until if I was to put it in a book, it would take up about two of these books. That's how much information. But we don't have that much time. The information we have covered before. But what I want to do is to give an update or revisit this particular material from 1994 and put some new research down. In the school of academia and Western education, but and basically a good structure for education or academia period is, in academia you go by two types of systems, two types of ways of looking at things. Number one, if you want to get to the truth, the first thing you have is anthropological or archaeological evidence, or some type of scriptorial or some type of ancient fragments based on, that would also be archaeology, where we talk about papyruses and rare books and rare artifacts that would actually literally tell the story of what are you trying to look for. And this would actually be the basis of the truth. Now, you can have a theory, and a theory could be the basis on what you might say, give a synopsis of what you are trying to postulate when it comes to the origin of something, trying to get close to the meaning. And that theory can be viable, it can be substantial to a certain degree until archaeological and anthropological evidence comes into play. So now, dealing with the history of the European, we have several theories. Well, the white boy just decided he just don't want to deal with it at all. You know what I mean? He analyzes things down to the T. But somehow when it comes to the origin of his self, and when we ask this question, well, if the black man was the original person, which Mead tells you, Mendel, Mead, and different other people, and all types of archaeological finds, late 1800s, early 1900s, late 20th century, all types of archaeological finds, including the, what's that, Newsweek magazine, 1987, or 88, I think it was 1988 might have been, and where they actually showed the two black people in the Garden of Eden. Mm-hmm. A Jerry Curl version, but still yet. Still yet. This is the basic fact that most humans now understand that civilization started in Africa. But all of a sudden the European, all of a sudden he has a way to just basically become ignorant. Whereas when we ask this question, well, if the origin came from Africa, where the hell did you come from? Because you being the doggone opposite of that origin. You see what I'm saying? In color, prototype, you know what I'm saying? Phenotype, strength, any kind of thing across the board. Well, where did you come from? And all of a sudden, they never entertained the question. Few black scholars tried to entertain the question, but they went based on a theory. Sheikh Anta Diop, Dr. Charles Finch. They went on a theory of climate adaptability. But it's only a theory. And it stands as a theory until you find anthropological and archaeological evidence. Well, they've always had it, but what I did was I combinated all of this particular stuff 7 or 8 years ago, and we got to the bottom of this. And so, but people still don't want to deal with it. People still want to deal with it. Some people say, well, what difference does it make? Well, it makes all the difference in the world if you have a hybrid species running civilization. Then, if you have problems in the world as indigenous people, you can pretty much say that in your lifetime, you should never feel comfortable with a hybrid species that have shown you forms of inhumanity.
So are you saying this European, this Caucasian is a hybrid of sorts?
A hybrid. I don't want to say mutation, because mutation or mutant is a natural phenomenon in nature. It might be a 1/1,000,000th of a chance, but it's still natural. You see what I'm saying? It might be a freak where you have a mutation after so many thousands and thousands of cycles. You have a mutation in anything, but nevertheless, nature does mutate. You see what I'm saying? The earth does have forms of mutations. You see. They go on all the time. So we don't want to call him a mutant. We want to call him a hybrid. A hybrid is a deliberate genetic concoction or a deliberate experiment. You see. Or a hybrid can be a mistake, but not a form of nature. Because most mutations in nature, although they are very rare, they don't occur to create a whole race of mutations.
You know, over the years in the conscious community, we've always referred to them as mutants. Mm-hmm. You're shedding a light on new science,
right?
The hybrid information.
Hybrid, which we're talking about mock. A mock is a copy of the original. It's a knockoff of the original. This is a knockoff Breitling of the original. You know, this is a $6,000 watch in its original state. $39 in Canal Street, Manhattan, New York. This is a knockoff watch. There's a difference. You see, there's a hybrid state, and we need to make this very clear. What we're talking about here is a immigrant human. An immigrant human, something that migrates in. And as the Holy Kabbalah, A.E. Waite's Holy Kabbalah says, it is a, how does he put it? An intruder. Something that is not there in the beginning, that is intruding and perpetrating a fraud as a human. The fact of the matter that it was created outside of the general civilization of humanity, of ancient civilization of humanity, when it did show up, people took it as another strain of a race. You see what I'm saying? Another strain of humanity, or what you would call a different aspect of humanity. All because its incubation period was secret. You see, was secret. And so when people saw it thousands of years later, they automatically just thought it was a form of humanity. And as a result, this has been the mistake of indigenous people around the world, because number one, our nature is that to accept. We accept everything. Accept everything. We accept humanity. And there's a difference. Give you an example of what we're talking about here. Because we'll get into the psychological aspect, but this is a good analysis right now. In the workplace, two kind of doggone creeds, two kind of natures. In the workplace, you walk past a black person you know, you say, hey, how you doing? You feel that person. You walk past that person 2 hours later, you might greet them again. You walk past them another 2 hours later, you might greet them. You might greet them all day. But that's us. We go by what we feel, and we go by how we feel about people. The difference. We go by how we feel about humanity. Whereas a white boy come, he might greet you in the morning. You see him 2 hours later and you greet him again, he might think you crazy. You understand what I'm saying? Now the difference here is this species goes by how you make them feel. So you know the old saying, well, you know, I really like you, but you're not like the rest of your people. That is because they don't feel nothing for the rest of your people. They're only responding because based on the way that you made them feel. You might have made them feel a certain way. It's like the movie Bingo Long and Traveling All-Stars, which is a basic fundamental thing in all forms of entertainment in America. You know, they took to the road, they broke off from the Negro League. You know the movie, they took to the road, they said they're going to play white teams. They were beating the hell out of the white teams, and white teams was getting all mad, and they had to go in and start doing all kind of buck dance and clowning to kick their behinds. Because the European goes by the way you make him feel, not how he feels about you. There's a difference. You see what I'm saying? It's always, you can produce a certain way to make him feel. He will accept you based on the way you made him feel. But not necessarily accepting you just by being a human. So they can love a Michael Jordan because Michael Jordan has over and above made them feel a certain way based on his talent. But they don't necessarily like the race that Michael Jordan comes from. There is a difference. There's a difference. So we're just talking about two types of natures. Whereas we, the indigenous person around the world, he accepts you just because you're human. And that is the humane thing to do. So these crews that came in, this particular European that came in, we automatically accepted him because something in the way, something broke down where we didn't have full access on its creation because it was created by a renegade priesthood in secret. And that's what we need to get into tonight also too. And go into this particular science. So what we want to do is we want to go into several aspects of evidence to deal with this. Now, let's get with the evidence right offhand so we'll know, so we can document some of this stuff. Do you know that Mary Shelley's Frankenstein is an adaptation of the creation story of the white man? Here's a book called Tobias Curtin, The Gnostics. The Gnostics is an ancient Camite group of Egyptians during the Alexandrian age and during the latter day period of Kemet at the temple of Isis at Philae. You had Egyptian priests that translated ancient hieroglyphic documents from Metanetta into Coptic religion. This is a book called The Gnostics. The Gnostics is a black ancient group, which in actuality, this is the group that Paul, Josephus, and other writers of the, especially writers of the New Testament, copied the Gnostics' work on the Gnostic Christ that comes out of Kemet, that Paul, Josephus, and other writers of the, especially writers of the New Testament, copied the Gnostics' work on the Gnostic Christ that comes out of Kemet, copied their works. And then when the Gnostics rebelled and say, hey, wait a minute, the Jesus that you're talking about here is not the Jesus that we worship, then the Roman government killed off the Gnostics. and took their religion. You see the story. It's always a classic thing with somebody, you got two people doing something. One person takes the other person's stuff and then kill the person off. Well, that's exactly what happened. Christianity is a stolen legacy that was killed off by an ancient group of people that was killed off called the Gnostics. And basically, this is the origin of the New Testament. The key here with the Gnostics is they had a Christ long before the birth of so-called Jesus Christ of 2,000 years ago, which basically was mythological aspect historicalized as a political move done by the Roman government. The Gnostics basically were a later-day Camite group that basically refashioned the same Horus myth. The difference between the Gnostics and the later-day Christians, or what you would call, which is the Roman inventions, is the Gnostics said that, as well as the Gnostics, the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Sumerians, just any ancient group. Any ancient group, because there's a discrepancy with all this Sumerian stuff and Babylonian stuff, because in actuality, Walter Williams is right on this one. They talk about all these ancient cultures, but we can't go nowhere and find them. They say that Babylonia was as great as ancient Kemet, yet we can't find up with some little clay tablets. we talk about a whole civilization we can't find. So obviously the white man is making up some stuff. But in so many words, Jesus was nothing but doggone states of the same Egyptian government. So all of it was Kemet. All of it was Kemet. The difference is the ancient world said that the Messiah is to come in the last days. The Romans say, no, we're going to make it come 2,000 years ago. And that is the great mystery that's going on. Sublime mythology makes grotesque history. So we're looking at a person of 2,000 years ago. You understand what I'm saying? That the attributes of the divine Christ is supposed to come back in the last days, in the latter days, which is the god Horus, Mithra, Perseus, Jason, Hercules, Dionysus, Sheba, Krishna. You understand what I'm saying? Krishna, Bacchus, Ha-ur, Ra-Heru-Ka-Hudi, Quetzalcoatl, all this particular one was all the cultures talk about. They talk about the end time Mashiach or Messiah. The Romans made it a historical person of 2,000 years ago, and that is the difference. Now, dealing with this, the Gnostics, in this particular book, the Gnostics, Cliff Tobias actually quotes Mary Shelley. And Mary Shelley in the book, Man the Monster, chapter 2 of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, it was written when Blake was 59. Now Blake is a philosopher also. William Blake is a philosopher also. When Blake was 59 and said, we were of the beginnings of Victor Frankenstein's quest to obtain powers of God. Victor confessed that during the trip to Fanon, a town near the French Alps, situated in the shores of Lake Lenon, and he goes into this thing where, as she's quoting what Victor Frankenstein is inspired, or what he is actually trying to attempt, and in her novel appears the word or the human Asclepius. And Asclepius is talking about here is not the Jesus that we were, and took their religion. You see the story. It's always a classic thing with somebody, you got two people doing something. One person takes the other person's stuff and then kill the person off. Well, that's exactly what happened. Christianity is a stolen legacy that was killed off by an ancient group of people that was killed off called the Gnostics. And basically, this is the origin of the New Testament. The key here with the Gnostics is they had a Christ long before the birth of so-called Jesus Christ of 2,000 years ago, which basically was mythological aspect historicalized as a political move done by the Roman government. The Gnostics basically were a later-day Camite group that basically refashioned the same Horus myth. The difference between the Gnostics and the later-day Christians, or what you would call, which is the Roman inventions, is the Gnostics said that, as well as the Gnostics, the Hebrews, the Arabs, the Sumerians, just any ancient group. Any ancient group, because there's a discrepancy with all this Sumerian stuff and Babylonian stuff, because in actuality, Walter Williams is right on this one. They talk about all these ancient cultures, but we can't go nowhere and find them. They say that Babylonia was as great as ancient Kemet, yet we can't find up with some little clay tablets. we talk about a whole civilization we can't find. So obviously the white man is making up some stuff. But in so many words, these was nothing but doggone states of the same Egyptian government. So all of it was Kemet. All of it was Kemet. The difference is the ancient world said that the Messiah is to come in the last days. The Romans say, no, we're going to make it come 2,000 years ago. And that is the great mystery that's going on. Sublime mythology makes grotesque history. So we're looking at a person of 2,000 years ago. You understand what I'm saying? That the attributes of the divine Christ is supposed to come back in the last days, in the latter days, which is the god Horus, Mithra, Perseus, Jason, Hercules, Dionysus, Sheba, Krishna. You understand what I'm saying? Krishna, Bacchus, Ha-ur, Ra-Heru-Kahudi, Quetzalcoatl, all this particular one was all the cultures talk about. They talk about the end time Mashiach or Messiah. The Romans made it a historical person of 2,000 years ago, and that is the difference. Now, dealing with this, the Gnostics, in this particular book, the Gnostics, Cliff Tobias actually quotes Mary Shelley. And Mary Shelley, in the book, Man the Monster, chapter 2 of Mary Shelley's novel Frankenstein, it was written when Blake was 59. Now Blake is a philosopher also. William Blake is a philosopher also. When Blake was 59 and said, we were of the beginnings of Victor Frankenstein's quest to obtain powers of God. Victor confessed that during the trip to Fanon, a town near the French Alps, situated in the shores of Lake Lenon, and he goes into this thing where, as she's quoting what Victor Frankenstein is inspired, or what he is actually trying to attempt, and in her novel appears the word or the human Asclepius, and Asclepius
Imhotep.
is Imhotep. Is the Greek form of Imhotep. And it's the Greek, and this is the same God that all physicians swear to with the Hippocratic oath. Imhotep, which is also given a remnant of an ancient Egyptian school, a mystery system that in actuality Victor Frankenstein, although a fictional character, is basically a retelling of the same old story of a person that creates his own human. So we're talking about Mary Shelley here. Understanding in these certain occult societies that was springing up all around Europe at the time. And these occult societies that was custodians of different works like your Rosicrucians, who literally had this particular information of the creation of the European left behind by the Moors in Europe at the University of Salamanca and 16 other universities in Europe. They had all of these particular texts. We'll go into some of these texts in a few minutes. But Mary Shelley mentions Asclepius or Imhotep, which is alluding to an ancient arcane school of knowledge. This is very key. This is very key. This is in the book, Cliff Tobias' book, page 133 of his book called The Gnostics, where he mentions that, and it's in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein book. We're just tying this thing in from the fictional as well as the actual evidence based on fact. Now, going back, isn't it amazing that outside of the fiction, or outside, of the theory, that the only hard-nosed evidence that we have is archaeological and anthropological? Which in actuality, we don't have to theorize on this. We actually have the ancient people out of their own mouths given this particular information, and we're going to go through some of this particular stuff. Now, the first thing we need to do, because we're talking about immigrant humans, or hybrid species. The first thing we need to do is I'll give a rendition of this, on what actually went down. Now, in this book, Hermetica, by Walter Scott. It's interesting that this book is not hard to find, but this book is being printed. It's just that if you go to the Rosicrucian Library out in California, they still sell this book. But all of a sudden, I noticed when I started really pumping this book, it became harder and harder to find. If you've noticed, a lot of times, certain books that I talked about, just mysteriously, it became harder and harder to find. And I'm not necessarily saying that in actuality that I'm ego tripping. Literally, people around the country, books that was plentiful until I started talking about them over and over again, this became harder and harder to find. But nevertheless, we have several texts. But this one I think is the one that is quintessential to what we're talking about here. Because in this particular book, on one of the pages, and Lord knows a book this thick with about 545 pages. To close the book and lose the damn page means you gotta labor. Because the book doesn't have an index, because it's taken from ancient fragments. And somehow the book got closed on the doggone page, but I will quote it to you, because all I need to do is just show you the book. Walter Scott's Hermetica, where the Egyptians, or the Camites, say that their biggest problem was to create another man. That's what the Egyptian says, documented in this particular book. That our biggest problem was to create another man. Right off the Hermetic text, and now to explain something about the Hermetic text comes from is the Greek word for Tahuti. The wisdom of Tahuti is the oldest science and some of the oldest sciences in the world that go all the way back, reach all the way back to Atlantis. I know that that's galactic suicide for most people of the collegiate world, but let's just understand that the Greek sage, that the Greek solid said that it was an Egyptian sage that talked about Atlantis. Now, Dr. Ben said that he did admit that this Greek sage, because I got the same text, talked about this Greek philosopher talked about how an Egyptian sage or a high priest told him about Atlantis. He did admit that. But he just said we just don't have enough evidence on it. But there's tons of evidence on this particular information. It's just that it's found in ancient mythology. And we got to understand that mythology